are live, 12:46. So this is our morning wake-up call. Afternoon, it's all fun. Today, I want to talk about 5-liter Fords, particularly the Explorer motor, which is popular. Excuse me. Primarily because, well, for two reasons really. For on the Explorer side, we have it has a couple of things that are better than the other versions of the 5-liter motor. So if you look at the 5-liter motor, you can go get a 5-liter from a Mustang if you can find them. I don't see a lot of 5-liter Mustangs in the wrecking yards anymore, or the early Fox ones. Now we might see some of the cars. A lot of them are 4-cylinders though, but I don't see a lot of 5-liters in those. We do see some 5-liters in T-Birds and Lincoln Town cars. And I don't see any SN95 versions either with a different intake manifold on there, but we do see Explorers. And the nice thing about the Explorer compared to the 5-liter is if you're nitpicking the power outputs, the Explorer motor compared to the previous 5-liter, the original one, has a better intake manifold. It has essentially a Cobra or GT40 style intake manifold. It's a cast aluminum version. And it also has better cylinder heads. It has the Explorer heads, which are basically the GT40 heads. Now, depending on what year Explorer you're looking at, they ran them both the GT40 and GT40P heads. So those were production heads used on that Explorer combination. And they worked very well. I should say that they work very well in comparison to the factory E7TE heads. They're a good, sometimes 20 or more horsepower better than the factory head. So if you're going to look for something to start with, that's why that makes the Explorer more desirable, let's say, than just going to a factory 5-liter deal. The original HO intake manifold, restrictive, the throttle body, the mass aerometer, the upper and lower manifold, the heads, those things are all restrictive on the factory 5-liter. And you got to change everything to make good power gains. You're not going to change one of those things on a 5-liter Ford. Like, you're not going to go, okay, I've got a stock 5-liter Ford. Now I'm going to put on some kind of intake manifold. I'm going to put on a GT40. I'm going to put on an Edelbrock, RPM or RPM2 or something like that, and then not change anything else and then get big gains. You'll get some gains, but it's going to be like, 15 horsepower or 20 horsepower maybe. You're just not going to get big gains because all the rest of the stuff is already holding it back. The possible exception to that, and the reason that I like the Explorer motor better is because, relatively speaking, it already has a better intake manifold and better cylinder heads than the 5-liter does in a Mustang. So those are already better. They're not airflow research better, and they're not, trick flow manifold better, or they're not that level of better, but they are better. And so if you take and put a camshaft in it, replace the factory 5-liter cam or the Explorer cam with an Extreme Energy 250, 260, 270 kind of camshaft, the Summit Racing versions, their letter cams, an E303, an X303, any of those. If you put a more powerful camshaft in, the gains that you get on the Explorer motor will be more than you get on the Mustang if that's the only change you made. The reason for that is the other things are holding that back. You got a camshaft. We know that we can make 400 horsepower with an Extreme Energy 274 camshaft. We know that the camshaft will do that. If you hold it back by having the stock intake manifold on there or the stock heads on there, it's obviously not going to do that. So, and I don't know, and so somebody can let me in on this. I haven't looked it up. I don't know if the Explorer camshaft is milder than the factory 5-liter Mustang camshaft. I'm thinking that it is, but again, we're picking nits there. I would never take a Explorer cam out and put an HO camshaft in there. If I was going to do a cam upgrade, I'd do a cam upgrade. I'm not going to go from a 190 cam and put a 193 camshaft in there and then go, oh, look how much more power I got. I got like seven more horsepower or whatever the number is. I wouldn't do it. If I was doing a cam, I would do a cam. Now, there are lots of Camshaft shafts that I mentioned that you could put in there that would show big power gains. We know even on a stock-headed 5-liter that if we put a 274 camshaft in there, it's going to be about 30 horsepower. Now, it will be even more if it has these other things. So, but ultimately what you have to do is you really have to change all of these things. And on a 5-liter, if you're going to make big power, like if you want to gain 100 horsepower, 110, 120 horsepower, you got to change the heads, cam, and intake manifold. And so that's pretty normal for a 5-liter. All the 5-liter Mustang guys will tell you that. Being a 5-liter Mustang guy and having tested hundreds of these things, hundreds of these combinations, I can tell you that. Yeah, and I've also tested them like this one that we're going to talk about, where we did heads, cam, and intake all at one time. But I've also gone through and done them individually, so we know what they do. And we've talked about that a little bit. That if you put a GT40 intake manifold on there, you put in this case a trick flow manifold, or in this case a dual plane intake manifold. We ran this carbureted, but if you just do the manifold, you get a certain amount of power. If that's the first thing, if you do the camshaft and the heads and then do the manifold, you get way more. So the order that you put them on is also going to help dictate the gain that you get from that thing. It's not that you have to have those other things. Well, you do have to have those other things, but it's not because the camshaft is matched better to the intake manifold. It's because you get a bigger gain from a combination that wants more of what you're giving it. Basically, if it needs more intake manifold and you've done everything else, then it's going to gain more power. Just like with an LS, it already has a good intake manifold. It already has good cylinder heads. You put a camshaft in it, and you look like a hero. But you wouldn't do that if those other two things weren't there. It just wouldn't respond the same way. So if we take a look at, I've got some dyno results here. We ran, we ran an Explorer motor, and we had long tube headers on it. We were controlling it with a Holley HP management system. We had bigger injectors in it because we were going to make more power with this thing. We ran, oh no, I take that back on this one. Let me take a look here. I think we started with this thing carbureted. Yes, we did, which explains this. I've run the test fuel injected also. But on this one, what we did was we took the Explorer long block, put a dual plane intake manifold and the carburetor on it, and then put long tube headers. We put a 650 Ultra XP carburetor on it. And this one was a dual plane, I think a Speedmaster one. So it was Explorer motor with a GT40 heads, the dual plane, 650 inch and 3/4 headers, and then an MSD distributor. And then we ran it as a baseline and run in that configuration. It made 264 horsepower and 316 foot-pounds of torque. So because we made so much more torque than horsepower, we know one thing, that this is even though we've changed the intake manifold already and made it presumably better, we know that it's what Richard would call a mild combination, because the peak horsepower number is bigger than the peak, or the peak torque number is bigger than the peak horsepower number. That's an indication that it's a mild combination. Also, the fact that this thing made peak power at like 5,000 RPM, made peak torque at 3,800 RPM, also a good indication that this is a mild combination. So then what we did was we took and put the trick flow version of the Extreme Energy 274 cam in it, which is 540, 560 lift and a 224, 232. I think this was a 113. And then we put trick flow as cast twisted wedge heads on it. And it did well. It picked up a lot of power, picked up more than 100 horsepower, went from 264 to 371. And 356 foot-pounds. And so it was up from 3,000 on out, which is where we started the load on the modified version. It was better everywhere. So it picked up, a good amount of power with our heads and cam. And this is on a combination that already had a pretty good set of heads on it in the GT40. And so this is the kind of thing that you would expect. We would have been down lower had this thing been run with a stock HO intake manifold, or even the Explorer intake manifold. Would have been down a little bit from this. And so we got good gains, but it essentially took all of the stuff. And one of the whales is in the house, Neil. One of the questions that I get a lot is, okay, well, what would it do if I didn't spend the money on the aluminum heads and I just kept the GT40 heads on there. How much would I be down? Well, they are going to be down. We know the GT40 head makes less than a twisted wedge head does. I have the you look at the video that I have up where I did the big head shootout, and the twisted wedge heads and the GT40 heads were run on the same kind of combination, and you could see which one made the most power. And the twisted wedge heads make more power than a GT40 head. But that power differential between those two heads is less on a milder combination than it is on a wilder combination. So we are compare those two heads on a 347 stroker, a 408 stroker, we'd see more of a disparity between those two things, because we would start to be taxing the airflow of the bigger head and not just taxing the airflow of the smaller head. So if you want to not upgrade the head and stay with your GT40 heads, two things are going to happen. You're going to make less power, which is, understandable. You're also going to have an iron head, so you're going to have more weight, and then you're going to have a change in the detonation threshold, I would argue, with the iron head as well. What people want, and having done this for a while now, what people want is they want to have the lesser expensive option be as good or better than the more expensive option. And that's rarely is that the case, because if it is, then it just wouldn't make sense for people to buy the aluminum head. But in this case, on the aluminum head, you're picking up a lot of things over a GT40 head or a GT40P head. The trick flow head's a lot lighter, so you're taking weight off right away, and that's nothing but good. It's aluminum, so the detonation threshold is going to be less, because aluminum is better at that than the iron stuff is. We could look specifically at the chamber design and kind of see. It'd be interesting to see what the actual detonation threshold is of both, more from a chamber design standpoint. But is like the GT40 chamber a little bit better and less susceptible to detonation than the trick flow design? Probably not. But if it was, would it be enough to offset the fact that it's iron and not they improve piston to valve clearance? They're light and they flow more and they make more power. So it's really just all of the good things. You just have to figure out is the cost worthwhile? Now you could also go in and maybe do some porting on the GT40 heads and maybe do some chamber polishing. You could do some, bowl work and maybe unshroud the valve and stuff, and probably get some more from that as well. For a DIY guy, that's a good deal, because that doesn't cost you anything but the time. And so if you can put the time into it and gain another 10 or 15 CFM, if that translates to extra horsepower, because as we know, if you're measuring something on a flow bench and you see a change in flow numbers, that doesn't always translate directly into power. We know that the trick flow head, the twisted wedge head, flows more than a GT40 head. But if we test those both on a stock motor, we might not see much of a difference, because the flow numbers don't translate directly into power unless the combination can actually use the additional airflow. And even then, it's not a guarantee. Where are we getting extra airflow? Are we getting at the 200, 300, 400 lift range, where it's very, very important because it goes up and down and passes through that twice, and there may be more of a gain through that. A big gain at 600 lift is irrelevant if we've got a 550 lift cam, because we're not going there. So there's a lot of things to consider, but a heads cam intake on a 5-liter Ford, kind of definitely a good idea, I would say, particularly if you're going to an aluminum head. I think any kind of performance application deserves an aluminum head. So we'll get a poll going here. Okay, would you replace the GT40 heads on your Explorer 5-liter motor with TFS twisted wedge heads for an extra 25 horsepower? What I'm trying to find out is 25 horsepower gain over the Explorer heads, is that enough to justify the price of the heads? Because that's the decision you'll have to make. If I'm doing a mild combination and I'm not going to get big gains by doing that, is it worthwhile? Is that cost effective? Eric, no brakes. I had a 3.8 liter in my T-Bird, 93. Had a great sound system. Total boat. Hola, Richwood. Wales is in the house. I never fixed on my Ford. I ran for forever until the cops took it. That's not good. Richard, is there a disadvantage to going to a 347 on a 302 block versus a 351? Is the taller deck more valuable than the smaller overall package? You'd have to decide that. And that's really more of a fitment thing than anything. I myself would rather have a 351 because I think it's a better motor, and I think you ultimately could make more power with it, because you could also make the 351 into a 383, 393, 408 if you wanted to do that. And the 351 is arguably a stronger, well, not arguably, it is a stronger block than the 302, the thin wall cast, late model 302 hydraulic roller block. 351 is stronger. If you're not going to take advantage of that, that's kind of irrelevant, though. It'd be funny. Let's put 2 bolts behind the frame. So you need to lift the engine to get it out. If it was easy, everyone would do it. What bolts are you trying to undo that you would want to move the motor to get to? Turbo Sentra. Track loader. Eric's getting the ads. I have a 347 small block Ford with 520 horsepower NA at 6,100. That's good power. But I use a stock HO block with the main cap girdle. Do you think my block can handle that power reliably? The main girdle will help you a little bit, but that's not where those blocks, the main girdle is not going to help where that block splits at. So if you have a problem, it's I'm curious how you got to 520 horsepower at just 6,100 on a 347. Also use a milling hive oil pump and 5-quart oil pan. Will the oil pan need to be increased in size to prevent it from running dry? No, it's not going to run dry. Richards, what's the cost difference on that? On the cost difference on what? John, what's going on? It's the time you cover trying to get to the oil pump. Okay. There are other advantages than just horsepower, weight, and better cooling. Rod bearing is coming in today, but I'm not in Sacramento. Received it. As soon as I get a chance, I'm going to put them in. So you're putting new bearings in it? Is that motor's not running right now then, right? Usually crack down the cam bore. Even a Mexican block NA will usually break over time. Yeah, it splits up from the main webbing up to the cam. Getaway, what's going on? I ran mine with a blower on there for years and years and years with a Vortec on there and didn't have a problem. And we ran them in World Challenge too and didn't have a problem, although admittedly we weren't making a ton of power. Do you have any? I have run small block Ford Pro Max heads and they work good. Pull the rod bearing cap on number 6 and it showed you a picture of it yet. So whole new set. You're not worried about the crank being hurt and you're not worried about the rest of the material that caused that problem being in the motor and stuff? Would you replace the GT40 heads on your Explorer 5-liter motor with TFS twisted wedge heads for an extra 25 horsepower? A little bit more on the yes side than the no side. I'm the mark for a 351 Windsor stroker, but I don't know which manufacturer I should buy one. you point me towards a good manufacturer? Yeah, Summit Racing probably has those. I like the Scat stuff. All of those are good, and you won't hurt it from a quality standpoint. 99.9% of the time, if somebody hurts something like that, they did that for some other reason. It was a tune issue. It was a not enough oiling issue. It's usually not of, hey, that crank wasn't strong enough to handle that. I don't think I've ever seen that. Finally got the bottom end in the 302, 311 main girdle, 7-quart pan, high volume pump, custom ground cam. Neil, I like the Mighty Car Mods guys too. The new Mini, the Mini Turbo, classic Mini with a Honda engine. The Minis with the B series in them, I've always liked because I'm a fan of those engines, and that's what everybody needs. Like everybody needs double or triple or quadruple the power output of the factory motor. CNC Motorsports for stroker kits. Yep. Richard, what about the LMR SVE CNC heads they sell? Who's they? Really, there's not much material gone from the bearing itself. No, I'm the bearing I would scuff up and reuse probably. But my question is, what kind of debris got in there to cause that? And then is there more of that debris? And where did that debris go? Did it get caught up in the, did you take the oil filter off and cut it apart and take a look in there and see what's in there? Would you choose the Cleveland block over Cleaver package for a power adder? No, I wouldn't. I would pick a Windsor block unless you're doing an aftermarket of either one of those. Late model restoration. I don't know about those cylinder heads. I don't think I've ever tested those. Those probably came out after I did all of that 5-layer testing. Ben 5.3 LH6 sloppy stage 2 pack springs ported 799s trunnion lifters cold air intake. It's my daily, but I'm trying to decide on different throttle body and millimeter intake manifolds. Well, your intake choices are probably going to be early truck, which is going to be a 78 millimeter. The Trailblazer SS, which is going to be a 90 millimeter. You could put a 92 on there also. No reason to put a bigger throttle body on that because the opening is that big on the manifold. Or you could go to a fast, which would be a 102. I picked up 2 big block Ford 460s, one with dove heads. You know of any reputable headquarters I can send it to? I watched one of your videos with 600 horsepower. The guys from MPG did those heads. It's MPG and Cam Research Corps. Those are the guys that I would have do it. I don't even know if they're still doing that anymore. Okay, you did cut the oil filter apart, Todd. Good. Their 600 horsepower package that they supplied was spot on. They said this will do that, and I like guys like that. They were in engine. I met them at Engine Masters, and so they were competing, and they had a short deck 410-inch 302 based motor that they put together, and it was very powerful, and it did a really good job. And because they, like with the big block Ford stuff, they had so much experience with those Ford packages that they have run and tested them a whole bunch. So when you put a bunch of them together and they all do the same thing, then you can say, hey, look, when we put this together, this is what it does. So when you put yours together, that's what it's going to do. So 90 millimeter will run good with, are you meaning deck injectors? The 90 millimeter and the injectors have nothing to do with each other. So that doesn't matter. What year 351 block is the best? I like the hydraulic roller blocks. 80-pound injectors are good. They give you room to grow for later on. %59% are saying they would replace them. That way later on you could add boost to it, and then you'll be all set. Near. So if you could get a solid 400 horsepower out of a GT40 package, would you go for a head upgrade on a 302? I'm not sure I understand what the question is. If you could port GT40 heads and get 400 horsepower from them with the right cam and intake manifold and stuff, and you wanted 400 horsepower, then you're there already, right? There would be no reason for you to change to a head upgrade. But you still don't have aluminum heads, and an aluminum head would be a better choice. I'm going to install those bearings and throw the hood on it and give it a bath. Okay, good. Are steam kits a necessary upgrade? We don't ever run them on the dyno. But your factory one should have some sort of crossover at least. $68 to $70. I wouldn't worry about trying to find an early 351 block. Unless you're trying to go for like mega horsepower, you're not worried about block strength. And trying to find some sort of date coded block is not, and it's not going to be a hydraulic roller. So that's not what I would recommend. Dang it. Dang me. Take me from the highest tree. It's Rob Williams. Would you try to go further on a 302? How much RPM would you have to spend to hit 500 horsepower with aluminum heads? Is it worth it? I wouldn't be asking that question. The question I would be asking is, if people want 400 horsepower and then they decide they want 500 horsepower, the thing that you're going to get with 500 horsepower on a 302 or a 347 is that you start going toward the loss in drivability. Because making 500 horsepower is going to require a really big camshaft, especially on a 302, and lots of head flow. You're not going to get that with a ported stock head, probably. If I say that, and then somebody like David Vizard decides to go all in on that and make a head that flows that much, but the vast majority of people are not going to do that. It's going to take some sort of aftermarket head. It's going to an airflow research head or something like that to get that kind of power. It's a cross in the front, but I see kits that are 4 corners on the head. Is it worth it? I don't think you're going to see any difference. The factory does it the way that the factory does it, and it works fine. I don't know that I would spend the money on that unless you would just want to do a quickie one by yourself. I did 100 body squats. That's a lot. Aluminum heads like trick flows and AFRs are always going to have more potential than GT40s. Yeah. What's considered a safe compression ratio for iron versus aluminum heads? It doesn't really work that way. It's not a static compression thing. It's a detonation threshold, and that's not just related to a static compression number. So you want a camshaft that's not the E303? It is a single pattern cam, which is what you probably want to make torque. But since you don't want me to say that, I'll say something else. You can go with an Extreme Energy 258 or a 264. Extreme Energy computer controlled. For EFI. Yeah, those are the two. Probably other cams out there now, but just looking at the comp book. A 94 Cobra, 220, 226 cam. You have shorties and 2.5 inch exhaust. Well, if you have a 94 Cobra, then do you have the Cobra style intake manifold and the stock heads on it? Because that's where you're going to look for power next. Heads will make a difference on that. And there's no reason to change that cam. That's fine. You squat 416 pounds for 27 reps. That seems like a lot. TFS 11 R170s for the win. Yep, those are good. Those are more money than a twisted wedge, an ASCAS twisted wedge head. But it's a better head, and you can make more power with that. $909. This is a good question. I get asked this a lot, and unfortunately, the answer is no. I haven't tested it. If I missed this video somewhere, I apologize. But have you ever used the 89 to 92 Ford truck intake manifold for testing compared to the Cobra GT40 and Trick Flow? I haven't. At least I can't. I don't have any data on that. I may have tested it long ago, maybe on a chassis dyno or something back in the 90s. But I don't remember running that. I remember using the lower for stuff. And I remember having the guys at Extrude Hone do some of those. But I don't remember testing one. But I kind of need to, though. What heads would be too big? I don't think you have to worry about that. Take a look at the port volume video that I have up on the small block Ford. I ran a 302 with 170, 195, 210, and 225 heads, and then we did the same thing on a 363. I wouldn't worry about that too much, but if you're going to put on that combination, I'd put an Airflow Research 165 or a 185 or the twisted wedge heads or an 11R. Any of those are going to be really good. Currently running a 6766 Precision, 38 PSI on a Lancer Evo. Very nice. Going compound, what smaller turbo should I get to spool the 6766 faster? Well, where are you having boost issues? Like, where does that thing, where do you want it to reach peak and what is it doing right now? Does 5.8 upper have longer runners? Are they longer than what? Back pain is the worst. Yep. That's not good. Back pain is not good. Peter, there are probably guys in the Evo community that have done what you're talking about, and they probably have data. I don't have data on that, so I'm not sure what to select for you. 780 horsepower comes online at 4,800. Before that, it's a lawnmower. Do you want it? Are you trying to get it to be more responsive for like daily driving, or are you trying to get it to come on so that you can 60 foot better? What is the goal there? Does the 5.8 have longer runners than the HO? I don't know. I'd have to measure the uppers and see. I would actually kind of doubt that, just judging by memory at what they both look like. I ask, but they say you're crazy. Yeah. I would have thought that guys have done compound stuff. My 5.3 LH6 is in an 05 Envoy. The muffler is deleted, but I still have a resonator. I have a Flowmaster Delta 40 muffler laying around. Do you think I'll gain or lose anything by clamping it on? No. Are you talking about the difference between a straight pipe and a muffler? I don't think you'll see much of a change on that stock thing. Might change the way it sounds. Yeah, Dylan, that definitely takes its toll. More responsive down low for more torque. But is it, Peter, so my question is, do you want it more responsive because you're drag racing it? Or do you want it more responsive because you're street driving it? And how often are you using the 700 plus horsepower thing? Like 38 pounds in that thing, does that thing hook up on the street? I mean, I know that the all-wheel drive is definitely going to help that. What I'm asking is, could you just put a smaller turbo in it and just have it be more responsive and enjoy it more? I'm not as far as replacing anything on my 460, but that EGR stuff in the early EFI is a pain in 1991. What is the solution to just have solid without the constraints? The EGR and EFI stuff in 91 is not really holding back the power output of that motor. So things that you would do to have it make more power, it will still do with all that stuff. What kind of power would I get going from long tubes and 3-inch from shorties and 2.5? I don't think you need a 3-inch at the power level that you're at. I don't think that that's going to hurt you at all. Long tubes will definitely help the power curve. I have videos up that show power gains from long tubes versus shorties or stock exhaust manifolds. Max horsepower built motor LS2. So what is your question about that? Because that's a statement. Are you asking how much power you can make from an LS2? Is this an NA motor? Is it a boosted motor? What are you using it for? I need more data. A business partner had 1,000 plus horsepower Evo drag car. Those motors you can make lots of power with those. What's the most you've seen factory 243 heads? Most of the guys don't go more than 30 on them because then the intake manifold doesn't want to fit. I thought the 5.8 looked a tad taller. I don't know that you can measure it by just measuring the height. You'd have to get in there and string it to see what the actual runner length is. What intake did Celine use? They used the truck lower and then their own upper. Hope helping a farm out with the harvest this fall. Might buy the T-bucket frame. So what are you going to put in the T-bucket? In the T-busket. The car hooks on 275s all around. Laughing and rolling anti-lag is great. But driving around the delay is annoying. Yeah. A low compression 4-cylinder with a really big... Does it have cams in it too? With a really big turbo on it? It's just going to feel soft. Pros and cons of not running an intercooler on a supercharger. you should run an intercooler because it's safer and it'll make more power and the charge temperature will be lower. I don't know what not running an intercooler. I don't know what benefit that's going to give you. Maybe fitment, maybe hood clearance, depending on where you place the intercooler. Oh, Peter has got 280 cams in it too. Yeah, all of the softness. Gonna put a 5.7 Hemi in the T bucket. Revs to 9,200. Cool. Does it also have a short runner intake manifold on it? Because why not? Let's just pack that on too. Truck currently has an E303 and it's horrible below 3,000. The idle makes it very difficult to drive. Hillbrook Performer GT40 heads. Try to make the most sub 3,000. A 351 is going to be a good answer for that. Because what's the E303? Is it 220 at 50, if I remember right? Been a long time since I looked at that. Yeah, 220. Yeah, the other cams that I mentioned would definitely be better down low than that. We just sold a 23 T busket with a 324 oils and 4 carbs. Nice. See, that's the kind of thing you should have in there. Because you just shouldn't ever want to go fast in one of those. Secondary air pump is blowing through a valve close to the EGR valve and it has a total power loss. And I can't find anybody in Germany that knows its way around these engines. Can you just cap it? My Prius feels more powerful down low. It should. It's an electric motor. It should feel immediately responsive. Is there a good forum or paid support I could contact for help? I don't know. Ton of 06 overlap. When should you or could you run 3-inch exhaust and not lose horsepower? I don't think, if you go from 2.5 to 3-inch, I don't think you're going to lose horsepower. I haven't seen that. What budget aluminum head did you use for an F303, 306, 70 millimeter turbo, M500? You could put all of the aluminum heads in a hat and then just pick one randomly and it will be the right one. Because if you're only looking for 500 horsepower from a turbo 5-liter, you're going to easily make that. You can't go wrong with an airflow research head. Maybe their enforcer head is going to be really good. You can't go wrong with a trick flow head, even the ASCAS stuff, even a twisted wedge head. 500 horsepower is going to be simple. Buddy Q has a 600 wheel horsepower Lancer and it's very responsive cam and turbo swap time. Yeah, KD, that seems like a pretty low price. Sold it for 5, could have got 30. I'll give the T bucket a roll cage and some other safety items so it weighs closer to 2,500 instead of 1,800. They don't feel safe. What's your simplest solution for 600 horsepower from 351? Is just a cam and springs and boost. You could do heads, cam, and intake manifold on a 351 and then add boost to it, and it'll easily be there. In terms of constraint for exhaust flows, are first most important thing to do or change on the 460 truck. I don't know what the exhaust is like on the truck. It's the easy way, the way that we tell whether or not the exhaust is restricting it, is we just drop it on a chassis dyno. We go to a chassis dyno. I have access to one, so it's pretty nice. But if you just drop the whole exhaust and let it run like that and see what happens, then you go, look, if there's no exhaust at all, I mean, it's better to actually have some tube coming out of the exhaust manifolds because it'll make more power. But if you get rid of all of it, however restrictive the exhaust size is, the Y pipe that you have, the cats, the mufflers, the over the axle tube, at the after the muffler stuff, you can find out how much all of it's worth. If you drop it and go, look, there's 15 horsepower total in that. Should I be looking at that? Because anything that I put on there is, it's going to be some, but should I even be looking at that? If you pick up 50 by dropping the exhaust, you go, oh yeah, I need to address the situation. But if it's not very much, and things like exhaust flow are not going to be worth a great deal of power when you're asking a low power output motor to breathe through that, because it doesn't need a lot of exhaust flow. It doesn't have to flow a whole bunch because the motor's not flowing a whole bunch. A dart block for the win. Yeah, dart block is good. You can also do like timed acceleration runs if you can do that. I wouldn't do it as a subjective thing where you're like, oh, yeah, it feels a lot faster, because it's going to be a lot louder if you do that, and it will feel differently. So a lot of times it sounds faster, so it's got to be faster. It's not always faster. My buddy inherited 500 plus vehicles and he's making all kinds of bad decisions. I'm trying to slow him down. He could have made a fortune just from owning the collection, but now it's scattered to the wind. Uh-oh. How are you going to mill the plastic intake manifold to make it work? .351 Windsor to 600 horsepower, convert to a Cleavor. You don't need to do a Cleavor. There are plenty of really good 351 Windsor base heads there. But to make 600 horsepower, if you wanted to do that with a 351, that takes a lot of camshaft and a lot of compression and a single plane intake manifold. It's not going to be a very good driver. You can go to a 408, make it a stroker motor, and it will make more, and it will get to 600 a little bit easier with a smaller cam, but still it's going to be a big cam to get their NA. I don't know what the safe limit is. I never go more than 30 on those heads. Building new fuel system for my application. What's the reason for in-tank versus external fuel pump? An intake pump is cooled because it's constantly submerged in gas, unless you're like me and you run your truck low on gas all the time. But it's constantly submerged, so it's quieter. It doesn't make the same amount of noise, and it's cooled, which makes it better. And usually the pickup is better on that than it is on an external pump. On a positive note, I'm taking his 58 Fuelie Survivor Vet to a show. Very cool. Yeah, I don't know how. I'm assuming that you're wanting to have a small chamber to get more power. And if you're running that on a 6-liter, I would look, rather than milling it more than that, I would look more toward unshrouding the valves. You'll get more flow from that. KD, does he have any Nash Metropolitans? Not that I don't need another motor. Do 8.2 liters. 8.2, you mean 8.2 deck blocks? The factory block does split. We have seen that happen, so we know that that's a thing. When and where exactly that happens, I mean, we know where on the block that it does that, but under what conditions it does that, that's still subject to debate. So is it all possible to move the 230 horsepower to a solid 350 on a stock 460? Is an engine swap the better option? No, it's easy to make 350 horsepower from a 460. Just take a look at the videos I have up on the 460. A 460 responds to everything that other motors respond to. More head flow, more camshaft, all of that stuff. In fact, I think that if I look at I took one of those. I think I did a carbureted one though. So it was the year before we went to fuel injection on that motor. But we did a 460, and then we put block forward. And then we did just a camshaft in it. So a carburetor. You could also do this with an EFI intake manifold if people have EFI intake manifolds for Fords anymore. I don't know if they do. Yeah, the cam was we put a very small cam in it and went to 340. Cam that we put in it was a 212 218, and it had a dual plane on it and a 650 Holly on it. And this was an early flat tappet motor. So it was a flat tappet cam. So it's pretty easy to get more power from those. If you got 5 cylinders, use a split and a cylinder, it would almost fall off. That's not good. If you turbo any flatheads, I've never done any work on a flathead at all. I walked behind the speed shop yesterday. There was a Nash 57 Pontiac Star Chief. Every property is like that. What is the reason to not over mill the deck surface on a fixed timing overhead cam? You're going to change the cam timing by milling the head. But there's no such thing as a non-adjustable cam gear. You can make all of it adjustable. We've cut off keyways and put them on there and then tighten the bolt down or re-drilled it. I mean, there's always ways to get around that. An Impala. Impalas are cool. Are there any like 1970 to 72 Chevelles that are like in perfect shape, but they don't have a motor or transmission in them, and that they're like $1,500? Because that's the one I'm looking for. If you've turbo diesel, you're 3/4 of the way there. I've seen what they look like. I just have never worked on one. Yeah, Chris, feel free to ask. A 460 is no different than a 351 or a 302 or a 347 or an LS or anything else. It needs the same things. It needs more intake flow on the intake manifold or a different intake design. It needs more head flow. It needs more cam timing. And a 460, that motor should already have enough airflow with a stock head to make quite a bit more power than it's making right now. Because those things are pretty low on the power output scale. And they can easily make with the head flow that's there, those heads could easily make another 100 horsepower with a stock head, just with enough camshaft and a good intake manifold and stuff. Offset dowels, elongate them. Yeah, all of that stuff is possible. 1970 Chevelle Shell. My neighbor has one here in Oregon. I don't want a Shell. I actually want a complete running car. I don't want a project. I would rather spend extra money and have it be a runner. Because I don't want to have to fix everything. I don't have to take the body off the frame and paint the frame and I don't want to do any of that. I don't mind building a motor and putting a motor in. That will be fine. Actually, if it already had a transmission, that would be ideal too. If I'm thinking about this right, whether or not the cam is going to be advanced or retarded is going to depend on the direction of the motor. Like we look at a reverse rotation Honda motor, obviously that would be different. And also I think it depends on what side of the gears the tensioner is on, because it's going to pull them toward the tensioner. I really want to see a redo of the stock Cam 302 build using all the parts listed in the article. I do too, because I don't think that there's any way that it made anywhere near 400 horsepower with a stock cam. But now the Fox buys for 20 years, getting another one next week. Bring me up to date in 2 minutes or less. Ready, go. Get a GT40 intake manifold. Those things are real money now too. Zero degree. You can run a 3-inch exhaust on an NPI motor on a 2-valve, but there'd be no reason to do that. It'd be way more exhaust than that motor needs. I'm building a 94 Mustang GT. Want to make around 400 horsepower. It's going to get trick flow 11R top end. Track max cam. I want to make boost. Well, I need a different cam. No, that camshaft works really, really well. As they all do. They all work good with boost. In fact, with that camshaft, we've run boost on that camshaft a lot. And with those trick flow heads and all that, it's all, that stuff's all good. It's all A to the G. I keep getting spam from a, hi, this is a modeling opportunity. I think you're barking up the wrong tree there. And that's not going to work. And just like that. We need more small block Ford stuff. I do like the small block Ford stuff. Working on a trade for a ProCharge 69 Chevelle and a 71 Project. Cool. Joe Don Baker de Chevelles. Sorry, Patrick Glenn. The LS6 Chevelle Authenticator. I don't want a numbers matching one. I want a driver. I had 2 wastegates before the small turbo and route it to the big turbo with that lower back pressure in the small turbo. Well, what it will help do is spool up the bigger turbo, because you don't want to vent that to atmosphere. That's one of the problems that I ran across when I was venting the exhaust, is that I was venting so much of the exhaust that the second turbo never spooled up. But once we routed the wastegate outlets and fed the bigger turbo, that worked out a lot better. I don't think you're going to, I mean, it depends on how you're controlling both of the wastegates. Do you see a benefit to any of the different adaptable injector types in the Fox body? I don't know if you're talking about adapters for the different size injectors or length or style or whatever, but the motor needs a given amount of fuel, and as long as you're not just like using maybe those pencil injectors that are just spraying a steady stream, and even those that go to the back of valve, we've made lots of power with those. I haven't seen big changes from any kind of different style injector, as long as the airfield is correct. So would that, in theory, retard the camshaft? It depends on where it is. If it's pulling it one way, if the tensioner is pulling it one way, like if you have the cams and it's pulling it and it's pushing on it this way, then it's going to do one thing. If it's over here and it's pushing it this way, it's going to do this. So you see, does that make sense? Yesterday, I came across an 88 RX-7 convertible. A guy wants to sell. Small block Ford based. The only upgrade a small block Ford needs is a B cam. That's right. Would you replace the GT40 heads on your Explorer with TFS for an extra 25 horsepower? Only 55%. Peter, are you only using one wastegate? Because we had multiple gates on ours. Great content. Would you recommend a stage 2 or stage 3 cam on a 6.2 LS? It depends on what you're trying to do with that motor. So if you tell me what the other things you have are on that motor, and I'm going to be leaving now, so we can't do that, but I'll be back tonight. If you tell me what you're trying to do, how much power you're trying to achieve, all of that stuff, and then I can give you a better idea what cam might help you do that. Richard needs a Chevelle for his 40 PSI L99. I don't have either one of those. I don't have 40 PSI and I don't have an L99. Or are you talking about the little 4.3 liter? Putting together an LS2 240SX, what exhaust setup would make the most power? Long tube headers and a dual exhaust will make the most power. The 1%'s gone missing again. That's right. And on that note, it is time to go, but I'll see you guys all tonight. Tonight. Whoa.